you to Kevin, Sean, Bryan, Columbus Web Group. This is awesome. I mean, I'm pretty sure that this is very unique anywhere, like in America, to have this awesome of a web community here in Columbus. Cardinal Solutions gives us a facility, so that's amazing. They always host this, as Kevin said, that a lot of these are here. So Cardinal does an amazing job kind of reaching out within the community to put these types of things on. So as I talk about today, what I like to do, just quickly go around the room, get to know everyone. What I thought we would do is just name maybe either where you work, or what I'm more interested in is, what is your role? Like, what's the larger organization? What's the feel of the larger organization? What is your role within that? And that will help me sort of figure out and help me better understand how we should sort of gear some of the talk. Give an overview of accessibility for about 10 minutes. And I'm baking in some conversation here too. So this is, I won't be talking 10 minutes straight. About 5 minutes of talking, and then 5 minutes hopefully of conversation. Building a business case. So again, kind of based on where everyone is, we'll figure out, walking through the best way that you can promote accessibility within your organization. Then and I move over to talking about WCAG and Section 508. Those are the two sort of, not gold standard, but that's what we all need to achieve, right? That's the benchmark for what we need to be building accessibility to. So we'll cover that for about 10 minutes. Testing tools, that's really one of the most important pieces of accessibility. So I got about 20 minutes. If you brought your laptops, it's totally up to you. If you want to install some of the stuff that I have, I can totally walk through that. I've got everything installed already. So if you want to, we have the public Wi-Fi is working. You don't have to, certainly, but so I do want to spend about 20 minutes talking about it, because that is one of the most important parts of accessibility. And then I baked in 5 minutes optional break, about the hour mark. If we want to take 5 minutes, that'd be great. We don't have to if we want to power through. And about 45 minutes of hands-on activities. And again, I have a few different options on what we can do there, and totally get feedback from the group around what makes most sense for you guys. And we'll wrap up about 5 minutes. I talk about let's make a plan for the next week so we all understand, and I can hit the ground running on what we might want to talk about next week. All right, so introduction. So I'll start. I'm Bryan Greene. I work at Nationwide Insurance in the user experience group. So we partner with our IT. So I am not responsible for the actual end product of accessibility. So we do our best in user experience to make sure, from a visual design perspective, that accessibility meets all color contrast and all the pieces that are important there. And we build prototypes, and we deliver design specifications to IT. And what we're trying to do is do our best to make sure accessibility is baked into what we hand over to our IT partners. So while we're not ultimately responsible for accessibility, we are really helping shepherd that through. Quick story about accessibility. So I've been not solely focused on accessibility, but about 2005, I remember distinctly being called into a meeting. I was working at an advertising agency down in Cincinnati. Got called into a meeting. We had a client that is down in Cincinnati. They do a call center type work, and they were very concerned about the Target lawsuit just happened. So Target got sued back in 2003, 2004 for not being accessible at all. So someone sued them and said, hey, I can't purchase products on Target.com. They won that lawsuit, and Target had to remediate and fix their site to make sure it was accessible. So that was sort of a little groundswell there of clients saying, oh boy, this is for real. We can get sued, and we do need to worry about this. So back in 2005, I started looking into accessibility. I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about Section 508. I don't think WCAG 2.0 might not have even been around in 2005. It was probably just WCAG 1.0. So that was sort of my entry into it, and I've been just kind of working on it ever since. Again, not my full-time job, but it's something that I just sort of bake into all of the things that we do. So that's sort of my situation and sort of where I'm coming from. So if we just want to take 1 minute each, just your name, kind of where you work, what's your role, and how you think that accessibility plays into your daily job. So I'll start over here. So overview. So I really like this quote, and this is really something that I really take to heart every day, and that I hope that you will start thinking in this way, is that many times the focus is on technical aspects of accessibility, and the human interaction aspect is lost, right? So if we start thinking about usable accessibility, it helps clarify just meeting the minimum standards. When I talk about that WCAG and 508, that's just sort of your minimum standards versus what's actually usable by people with a disability. and that's Sean Henry. And he's got, and he gives a lot of go quotes. I've used his quotes in previous accessibility talks. So I think that that really hits home for me, because I think what happens a lot of times is that, I just be like, oh, I just need to check that box and move on, versus actually really making an effort to make it usable. And it's really not that hard. So we'll talk through that. So a disability is not so much a personal health condition, but it's mismatched human interactions. So it's taking the responsibility and saying, I feel like this first one's a personal health condition, that it's my fault that your site isn't working right. And that's not the case, right? It's actually your fault. It's our fault that our websites aren't being able to be used by people with disability. So this one really struck me, and so we're not going to watch the whole video, but there's just a couple minutes here. Not even a couple minutes, like less than a minute. So one of the
things that I think is most important about a disability perspective is to make life work, to make things fit between body and world. You change the environment, not the body. You change the environment, not the person. And that structure is one that says you are a person equal in dignity and value and worth to every other person. I went to Washington, D.C. this summer for a week to be a part of and to participate in the celebrations and the events around the 25th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
President Bush.
With today's signing of the landmark Americans for Disabilities Act.
That hit home for me, sort of talking about, that mismatch, right? And it's sort of that it's not the persons with the disability's fault. It's really our fault for not making their lives work. So 20%, about 20%, right? And what is that? So 20% is about the number of Americans with a permanent disability. And the number fluctuates. I've heard down to 18, I've heard up to 20. When you look at the census data is taken so infrequently, so it's a little out of date. But I would guess that by now in 2017 that we're probably maybe at 20 or above. But that's a permanent disability. So what's 100%, right? 100% is all of us at some point will be temporarily disabled at some point in our lives, right? That there's going to be something situational that happens that is going to prevent us from being able to access the web in the ways that we normally do. So what are some examples of that, right? So, and this is through Microsoft. It's a little cut off at the bottom, but Microsoft actually in the last year or so has been amazing in the accessibility, which is really interesting to me. I think that they really fell off, and Apple, all that you heard is sort of Apple is, the accessible company. Now, just within the last 12 to 18 months now, Microsoft is absolutely exploding. If you look at Edge, they talk about their the Edge browser is one of the most accessible browsers out there. They're tweeting all the time. They've got this inclusive design practice almost. They're starting to put out a lot. So I'll make sure that all these links are available to you. I encourage you, please, to go take a look. I mean, this stuff is just amazing for if you really want to dig in. So if you talk about what types of disabilities that we have, and over here, that's not going to work. Over there on the right-hand side, we talk about the different types of impairments, right? So motor impairments, and here's some examples, right? So a permanent might be that you're missing a limb, or you might be in a wheelchair. But there's temporary. Maybe you hurt your arm. Maybe your arm's in a sling or something like that. And then the one situational, you're a new parent, and I did this. I was rocking my son, and I'm on my phone, with one hand, trying to use a computer, trying to get a little work done with one arm. So visual impairments, and these are all spectrums, right? So especially with sight, blind, being legally blind and completely having no vision whatsoever is on one end of the spectrum. But the other end is that maybe something along the lines of cataracts, right? I'm wearing glasses. I see, a few folks are wearing glasses. And so I just can't see as clearly. If I decide I don't need my glasses all the time, I would take them off. Sometimes I'm finding myself, zooming in a little bit on websites. Distracted driver, I think, is a horrible example. If you're surfing the web while driving, please don't. But situational, right? And so that might be something where you don't have complete, that you're trying to do work, but your kid or, someone's catching your attention all the time and you're not really paying attention, you're going back and forth. hearing impairments or deafness, right? So again, that's a spectrum where on one side it's completely deaf completely. Maybe you have an ear infection. But the one that I see all the time is like, they give the example of the bartender, but I go out to, you go out to a bar, you go out to a restaurant, you're watching a game, you're watching a TV show, or at the gym. They always have closed captioning on, right? Because you can't obviously hear that TV in that type of situation. So they add the closed captioning. So Microsoft's talking about speech, and they sort of nonverbal laryngitis and heavy accent. From the web, that's not as big of a deal, right? We're not yet talking to websites, but you think about, if you start thinking about Alexa and the voice UIs, that's something certainly that we need to start considering in the near future. The other one we sort of consider is cognitive impairments. So cognitive impairments is things around like epilepsy, dyslexia, things that might be challenging, not mental issues, but things that are cognitive that you have trouble understanding things. So that sort of gives you the wide range of why we care about accessibility and the different types of disabilities that are prevalent in America that make up that 20%. So this is the 20% here, right, on the far left. But then you start adding in these that move to the right, and it's more and more. And that's what we talk about, that 100%. Everyone's going to have a situation at some point in their life where they're going to need to have a website that's built more accessibly. Okay. So move on to the business case. And so, and I think I heard it a lot in sort of in your introductions, and that's why I wanted to cover this, is so I'm not so much, because you're here, you obviously care about accessibility, but where I'm really giving this information to you is that to arm you to go back, and I heard, a lot of people in my organization don't care about accessibility, they don't understand it. So put that lens on this. I'm not necessarily talking to you directly, but I'm giving you information, I'm giving you resources, I'm giving you numbers in a way that you might be able to approach going back to your company, your organization, and saying, this is why we should care about accessibility. Here's the steps that we need to take to move in the right direction. And knowing that every business thinks a little bit differently, right? Every business probably has different motivations on why they might want to adopt accessibility. I'm going to cover a lot of these different ways, right? So you have a full portfolio. Okay, do you care about the numbers? Do you care about this? Do you care about that? We're going to cover a lot of different ways that you can talk about accessibility to folks. So a little over 50 million. So what is the 50 million number? Those are the number of people with disabilities in the United States. And I make sure you can't see it, it's down here. So I reference all of these in the corner. So I have references for all these. So again, if someone's like, where'd you get that number? And I absolutely always tend to go towards the government sites because that's was typically most organizations like, oh, this is the government. So this is from ada.gov, right? So there's I do like to find where possible government statistics. I think that carries a little bit more weight than just Joe Smith or something like that. So 4 million. What is 4 million? So the number of Americans that turn 50 each year, and the people that are in that 50 plus age bracket spend over $400 billion in 2013, right? So this is 14 years later, right? So I'm sure that these numbers will keep going up. We talk about baby boomers, right? That the baby boomer generation, more people are retiring every year. They're getting older. They just don't have the same eyesight, the same dexterity. So this is a huge demographic, and it's only going to be growing each year. So as I talked about, I threw out the 20% number before. In this particular example, this is from ada.gov, and this is a little old. They talk about 18.1 is the percentage of U.S. population with a permanent disability. And there's 13.3% of Hispanics in the U.S. population. So that means that the people with permanent disability is actually larger than the country's largest ethnic, racial, or cultural minority group. So a lot of times when you think about, people with disabilities, there's nobody out there. There's very few. Think about that. If your organization is targeting different, women or Hispanics or different the elderly, that the people with disabilities are the largest group, or larger than a lot of these other groups. Talk about spending power, right? So people with disabilities have $175 billion in discretionary income, and that is compared to only $40 billion of tweens. So we throw out some different, so this is CDC.gov, and they put out this number, and this is a little bit old as well, but they talk about, so again, if you're trying to compare money of spending with this, folks with discretionary income with disabilities versus, a pretty popular other group, which is tweens, Americans with disabilities have more than 4 times the buying power, right? So just because they're disability doesn't mean that they can't spend money, and they want to spend money, and they're going to spend money at websites and at stores that grant them access, right? So it's no different than, you know, if they want to go and buy groceries, or they want to go and buy a T-shirt, and there's only stairs and there's no ramp, and I'm in a wheelchair and I can't, you know, I literally have money in my hand, I give it to you because you're not making that location accessible. It's the same with the websites, right? I have money in my hand, I'm ready, my credit card's in my hand, I want to spend money with you, but I literally cannot navigate your site, right? You're making it hard for me to give you my money. So again, we talk about different ways that we can build a case. So this is, and I kind of blew this one up a little bit more. So this is from WCAG, or from the W3C. And they have a whole case. They have a huge section, it talks about business cases. So social. So you think about the role of accessibility in providing equal opportunity for people with disabilities, which is just what I sort of talked about, right? So digital divide, benefits with people with disabilities. This is kind of the soft. You know, if your company or organization cares about social issues and cares about more of those, social factors, I think that this is important to sort of play this up. So you can talk about, but beyond just accessibility, there's also things around like older people I talked about, right? Those temporary or situational scenarios where having an accessible site will benefit you. So technical, so if you think about reducing site development time, maintenance time, enabling content in different configurations, being prepared for advanced web technology. So this is really about building a better web, really, right? And that doesn't mean that you don't have to build differently to be accessible. Building accessibly actually means that you're building it correctly. So that you can actually improve your technical, or reduce your technical debt. Financial factors, and again, I talked about money, right? So if your company's, I need money, I need to, show me the money, how am I going to make more money by doing this? Obviously from SEO, it has impacts to SEO, it has impacts to being, search engine optimization, getting more people in the door, right? I have a credit card in my hand, I want to spend money with you, and you're not taking my money. So you talk about those numbers I talked about, you talk about the size of the folks with disabilities, their spending power. So give you 3 different ways to think about this, right? 3 different techniques that you can kind of go back to your organization and say, hey, this is why we should care about accessibility. That doesn't always work. So keep calm, call your lawyer. So there's the legal piece, right? So this is coming fast, and this is coming quickly, is that, that you are going to have, the web accessibility is going to be starting to be regulated, and that governments, laws, policies, regulations, that they're going to require, and it's already happening today, right? I mean, I talked about a lawsuit with Target, not 15 years ago, but 12 years ago, probably more. Every day, new lawsuits are being brought against organizations who, are not accessible. Especially if you are, public schools, that's huge. Online learning, my understanding is the online learning, that's become the charter schools, right? And being, get your high school degree online. My understanding is that those are kind of a mess. They're not accessible at all. But it's coming. The airline industry, financial institutions. If you're banking, online banking is huge for someone with blindness, right? That they don't have to go to a physical location anymore. They can do it all. So that's going to be coming. So I don't like talking about it because I feel like that's like the last resort, right? Okay, if you don't care about money, you don't care about technical, you don't care about the social factors. Okay, well, this is why, is that this is illegal, that we do need to do this to meet our legal obligations. Any questions about that? Okay, so let's talk about cost, right? So, because that's going to come up. Okay, let's say that you've convinced them through one of these 4 ways, or just through conversations, you've convinced, yes, we do need to spend time on accessibility. We do need to make this a priority. And probably the next thing they're going to ask is, okay, how much is this going to cost me, right? Okay, we haven't done that before, right? I kind of heard that a little bit. We never cared about accessibility. It's never been, on the thing. So how much is this going to cost? Well, So I can't give you a number, right? I can't say accessibility is going to be this much more. But here's some considerations, and it's not free. I wish it was, but you think about some of these are capital expenses, and some of them are just time effort, right? So determining accessibility requirements and for final deliverable, that's a little bit of time to figure out how are you going to operationalize accessibility, right? Are you going to start putting it in your story cards? Are you going to start, how do you deliver those requirements to the people that are ultimately going to build it? And this would be something if you're button up, that you're not just freelancing and you're not just working on your own. If you are in a larger organization that does document their requirements and deliver it, in scrums or things like that. Developing internal style guides. I mean, how are you going to, that kind of ties in with the first one. How are you going to deliver this? How are you going to make sure that the sites are accessible? You might need to spend some time on training, right? So this was awesome. This is free, right? So we're here, we're training, we're learning. Can you go back to your organization and teach, right? Can you give enough of these resources? And so training could potentially be free. There are so many resources for free, and I'll show you some on the web, through the course of this class. But there's so many videos and online possibilities. But if that's not right for your organization, you can spend money and bring someone in to help train your staff. Purchasing new software, possibly hardware, right? So I talked about testing. That is a big piece of it. Most of the online testing tools are free. Some are not. Some cost some money. So it's up to what works right for your organization. Modifying existing code base, that's the biggest one, right? So it is going to take time. If you have a completely inaccessible site, it's going to take time to train, to figure out what's wrong, to fix it, and then the regression test, and then push, right? So but that's not a capital. We talk about capital expenses here, and then possibly new software or hardware. But modifying existing code bases, that's just time, and that's something that it doesn't have to necessarily be a dedicated effort, right? I mean, what works for your organization? Do you want to do like a 1 or 2 week, or 1 or 2 sprints and just knock it out and get it done with? And then now you need to figure out how do you operationalize that long term, or do you want to just work on it? Let's just carve off 1 or 2 cards, each sprint, and be able to try to just kind of pepper it throughout. Additional QA time and resources, that's really the biggest one, right? So I can help you as a developer or a designer, make sure that you're thinking about accessibility and building it as right as you can. But then if you're really going to take that step and actually, how do you QA this, right? So we're going to talk about all these testing tools. And so you're going to have to get your QA team up to speed on how to test for this. And then, if we're really serious about accessibility, consultants fee salary, bringing in subject matter experts. So and I talk about some resources here in a few minutes about outside vendors that you can potentially bring in if you're looking for an outside perspective. So the other thing that we sort of, that you might be asked, right? So we talked about, how much is this going to cost? And again, I wish I could give you a number, but this is just a lot of things that you can think about. But then metrics. So that's the other thing. It's like, okay, well, how many people are coming to our site that need these assistive technologies, right? So keyboard only, I don't know how you're going to capture that, right? So let's say someone does have a motor skill disability. They can't use a mouse. They're only using a keyboard. Well, I use a keyboard a lot, and I can use a mouse, right? So I don't think that that's a valid metric that you could say, and you could potentially track that, right? You could put a hidden, and we do this all the time, and I'll show you a technique around, skip the main content. It's a little hidden link that's only accessible through the tab order. It's not visible, but it'll appear if someone's using a keyboard. And that's really for screen readers or someone that doesn't want to go through all the stuff at the top. Let's say you have a massive navigation. They just want to get to the content. You could potentially put a tracking event on that, but I use that all the time, so I'm not disabled. Screen readers are not user agents. So that's the other thing. It's like, how many people are coming to our site that are using a screen reader? It's not a browser. It's installed as a system. You're using a browser, and it's reading what the browser's telling you. So we'll go through examples with Safari and Chrome. So it's going to come back to you in your logs as being Chrome or Safari. You have no idea if I'm using a screen reader or not. So, and then screen magnification, that's another piece, right? You're not going to get any metrics around that. That's just the way that people are starting to look at your site. And often those are not only through the browser, but they're also in the actual OS. Anonymous is the other thing, is that most people with disabilities, they don't want you to know that I'm disabled. It's being kind of going back to that, it's not my fault, it's yours. I don't want to tell you that I'm disabled, right? And then there's the ADA component, right? That Americans with Disability Act, same thing with like hiring, right? You can't use that, and for hiring decisions, you really shouldn't be making those, you shouldn't be making decisions based on whether someone's disabled or not, because they are a protected group. So that's talking about metrics. And so if you think about, well, how, so they're like, oh, well, so I'm putting my, business hat on, right? Oh, so you can't tell me, I have no idea. Is there one person? Is there 1,000 people? We have no idea. But you start thinking about, like, would you say you're going to open a new retail store, and you're going to say, that there's steps up to your store, and you're going to say, well, we're not going to build a ramp until we know how many people are going to be using this ramp, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, beyond the ADA, beyond being a requirement that you have to make that facility accessible, but think about all the things that are meant for accessibility that help us all the time. And then my best example I could give is the automatic door openers, right? With the wheelchair, and you click in, the doors open. How many times has anyone seen that someone that's perfectly able to open a door, they push the button? 10 times a day, right? They're just walking, they push it, it opens the door. That wasn't meant for that, right? That was meant for someone with a wheelchair who obviously can't open a door. They give them a button and it opens the door automatically. That's helping millions of people every day, right? So the piece of it is that, ramps, I take ramps all the time. If you don't want to take the stairs, you can take the ramps. Voice on elevators, if you know the steps. If I'm sitting there on a long elevator ride, I'm on my phone, it's nice that it announces, hey, you're on the 30th floor. I can get off. I don't need to worry about, getting off on the wrong floor. So all of these things were built with accessibility and for people with disabilities, but it's helping everyone. And that's the way we can think about web accessibility too, is that just because you're keeping folks that have some sort of permanent disability or temporary disability, there is the ability in that what you're doing is making a better experience for everyone. So we talk about baby steps, and what I'm saying here is that, we sort of I alluded a little bit to, how do you want to start approaching this, right? Do you want to just full bore tackle it as one project, or do you want to just sprinkle it in? And what's really important here is that you do just take baby steps, right? So I'm hoping that by the end of today, I'm going to give you some techniques that you can go back on Monday, and within like one line of code, you can make your site more accessible. Right? So it's not going to take a lot, and there's ways that you can sort of baby step this along if you choose to. And the other thing that's interesting, I never thought about until we started working on it at Nationwide, and depends on how, I won't say paranoia, but I think it's just being very diligent, is they talk about being careful of the language in emails, right? So what I don't want you to do is go back to your office on Monday and send an email to someone important and say, we're so out of compliance, we're breaking all the rules, we're not ADA compliant, we need to fix this ASAP, right? Because what happens is, in the unlikely event that you do end up getting sued, right, that now that becomes possible, hey, they knew back in early 2017 that there was a problem and you didn't do anything about it. So you want to be careful and say that, that I think it's important that we improve our accessibility, or that we're working towards bettering our accessibility, rather than saying you're out of compliance. So that was something I never thought about until now, which is, again, it's probably being a little bit paranoid, but I think it's a good thing to keep in mind, is to make sure that that you're improving accessibility, not that you're out of compliance. And the last thing I'll say is, we talk about, I like drawing this parallel because I think there's a lot of similarities between accessibility and responsive web design. So if we go back, and is everyone pretty much building responsive now? Responsive, okay. So, and we had these same conversations 5 years ago, right? It's like, how much more is it going to cost for us to build this responsive, right? How much more testing, how much more development time? We've never done this before. We like our 960 in the center. Fixed, testing's easy, development's easy. We have all these frameworks that we can just get the site up, build up quickly. And then you start to realize, hey, by the way, 20% of our users are now using a mobile device. 30%, I think I've heard we're getting to close to 50 now, right? 50% of access to webs is on the mobile. And so you look at that numbers and you say, oh crap, okay, we have to build it. We have to build responsive. So what do we have to do? Well, we got to up our skill set. We got to start learning about it. We've got to start learning about responsive. We probably need to buy devices. We never tested on mobile before. We need to train our QA team on how to test for these things. That's the same with accessibility, right? But what happened with responsive is now, at least the case in Nationwide, we don't even talk about it any other way. We don't talk about, oh, or is this going to be a fixed width site or is it going to be responsive? Everything that we're going to build is responsive. We know that just cost of doing business, we're going to purchase these devices, we're going to train our QA staff, we're going to train developers that don't know how to do responsive. It's the same thing with accessibility. How are we going, so you've got 20% of your visitors are probably, would benefit from accessibility. You're going to need to train your developers. You're going to need to buy some new, maybe not even buy. It's probably cheaper than responsive because you don't need to buy mobile devices. There's lots of free testing tools. It's really training, right? And keeping accessibility at the forefront of what you're doing. All right. Anything about business case? That was a lot.
So basically, what you're trying to say is, let's not view it as an accessibility issue. Let's view it as based more along lines of. So what you're trying to say is, create it more integrated into like responsive web design. Try to make it accessible for everybody.
Yeah,
like
so it's not even a thought. It's like, and that's my hope, and I don't think that we're here yet. But just like we don't even build a site that isn't responsive, we're not going to build a site that isn't accessible. It's just built into our process. Now that's not going to happen tomorrow, right? That's going to take, but it's not as, responsive web, it was quick. And again, going back to the unfortunateness, and I'll talk about some dates coming, but there are dates where the government is pushing requirements around businesses being able to make sure that your sites are accessible. So going back to that legal aspect, hey, here in like 2 years, we have, it kind of reminds me of like a Y2K, right? Everyone was having, craziness in the late 90s thinking about, oh crap, is our date's going to be, roll back to 00 instead of, 1900 instead of 2000. So it's coming, right? The government is starting to look at this now. So that's another piece of it that might be able to kind of push things along a little bit and say, hey, it's coming. We need to, regardless if you don't care about the money, you don't care about the social, you don't care about the technical, okay, legal, it's coming, and we need to tackle this. And it's not that hard. And that's what I'll sort of hopefully show is that building these sites to be accessible is really not that hard. So the two different ways you can look at how are we going to, what's our benchmark, right? How do we know if our site's accessible? I've used the word accessible. I've talked about different ways, but I haven't actually dug into like, okay, how do we measure our sites against for accessibility? So this is the gold standard, is WCAG 2.0, and WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's put out by the W3C, so it's not a third party. It is the governing body. It's the W3C that puts these out. And there's 3 levels of conformity. Typically we say, either single A, double A, triple A, or I don't normally say AA or AAA, but so double A is pretty much where everyone is heading, and actually the double A is included in the new Section 508. So right now WCAG 2.0 is not a legal requirement, right? So it is a guideline that is recommended by the W3C, but there's no legal requirement right now that you follow this. As I started talking about, there are starting to be industries where it does become required, and it's going to be more and more. So let's dive a little bit into what is in WCAG, and I'll show you a couple quick examples. So it's broken, they give the acronym of POUR. And so how do you break it down? It's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So again, they do, WebAIM does a great job. As another great resource, it's webaccessibilityinmind.org. But they give a really great article about this. So we talk about perceivable, and so this is, again, how are we going to measure our accessibility? So we need to provide text alternatives for non-text content. Typically you heard you got to include alt tags, right? So that's one of the first things under perceivable. Provide captions for alternatives for multimedia, right? So if I'm watching a video and I'm deaf, how am I going to understand what's going on? That's why you use closed captioning. Again, not only deaf. What if I'm in a bar or working out or something like that? create content that can be presented in different ways. So that's talking about, sorry. Making sure, understanding that people don't always have a mouse, they're not always looking at a screen, and how can the way that you develop these sites be interpreted and presented in other ways that can be understandable for different technologies. Make it easier for users to see and hear content. That's what we just sort of talked about, right? Closed captioning, things like that. And then there's a deep dive into each of these. So operable, make sure it's functional with a keyboard, right? That's important. Don't give users enough time to read and use content. There's those carousels, right? And you fly through them, and you're not giving people. So that's when you think about the cognitive side of things. Maybe I have dyslexia. Maybe it takes me a little bit longer to read the content. And if that's on a timer, if you're not giving the ability to pause and to take their time, then it's really not going to be accessible. Content that causes seizures, and we think about this is that there are certain I don't know if it's megahertz, but flashing of light can trigger seizures in people with epilepsy, and it's a rare but serious condition. And help users find and navigate and find content. So make sure that this is what we all want to do, right? We want to make our sites operable. We want everyone, not just folks with disabilities, but anyone to be able to find, navigate and find content. Understandable. You want to make it readable. This is where I think like we've kind of gotten a little cute with CSS and CSS content. You can inject content through CSS. Whether that's going to be readable or not, you got to think about content appearing and operating in predictable ways. So that's another one of those things where it's important for accessibility, but it's important for everyone when you think about it, right? We want our content to operate. So you don't want to have your continue button to be on the right, on one page, and the left, and the top, and the bottom, move around these different aspects. You want to make sure it's consistent, and that when I see a button, I know what that button's going to do, and it's not going to do something unexpected. And help users avoid and correct mistakes. Again, it's something that helps everyone, not just for accessibility. And robust is one that you just think about, that you want to. That's what we're trying to do now with the web, right? Is that know that technology is ever evolving. These screen readers are evolving, right? They are getting better. So you want to make sure that you're baking in things that will be not future-proof, but you have to think about it. It is in the terms of almost like another browser. That that these software is being updated constantly to be better, and you need to be prepared for that. So some resources. So this is all from the W3C, and and the one thing I keep hearing, and I'm not going to go through I'm just going to bring up one of these because I'm not going to go through all of this, right? Because it's a very large document, and all different sort of checkpoints under that POUR framework. That's just the overarching framework. There's tons of little check marks. But what I keep hearing a lot is that, I need like a checklist. And I think if we go to, oops, are these not, okay, hold on.
I'm posting all these links and stuff.
Awesome, thank you, yeah. So this is at a glance, and so if you look at how things are, so this is the POUR, right? And they give links, and you're deep diving, right? So if you click on text alternatives, so this is all of WCAG, right? So I know it's overwhelming, and it looks like a lot, but spend some time looking at this, and you can start to, and this one is pretty awesome, I think, is that you can start filtering. So there's lots of ability. So I think WCAG realizes, oh boy, this is overwhelming for folks. We can actually, so they've done a pretty good job of actually going through and making things a little bit easier to consume. You talk about your different levels. If you're not going to, the recommendation is you really can't, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to meet AAA. So if you don't worry about that, you can take that off. Depending on what sort of information that you're showing, sufficient technologies, advise, or failure. So if you start looking like show techniques, so here's your alt tags, right? So text alternatives. So you show techniques. And is it broke? Let's see if it's not. Let's see if I can find one that's. Here you go, failures. So if you're giving this to your QA team, here's your failures, right? Due to text alternatives that are not alternative, failures to success. So they start giving you these failure criteria. You can even click on this, right? And now you're getting, so if you might have a requirements analyst that would love this stuff, or QA team. So it's all here, and you talk about, if you kind of chunk it down into those smaller pieces of perceivable. Here's operable, keyboard accessibility, understandable, right? And then robust. And robust is pretty small, right? And it's not, so that's not as overwhelming. So I know there's a lot here, and it kind of looks like a legal document with, 1.2.7, right? But this is going to, all of your testing tools are going to reach back to this. This is sort of the gold standard. So when I show you these testing tools, they're going to say, 1.2.2, you did not have captions or something like that, and they will link to this particular section. So when you have time, the more you understand this, the better prepared you're going to be. So again, I can't deep dive into all of this today, but this is something that, again, all these links are there, and there's lots of different ways that you can consume this. They've got, more of the tech side, understanding. So the W3C's done a lot of work in the last few years, really making sure that this is understandable. Yeah.
So you talked about the different standards, right? There's single A, double A, triple A.
Yeah.
So what context would that be with, say, a single A is for something and
So the different levels talk about the, do I want to say like how accessible. So single A, everyone should be targeting single A because that's the bare minimum. Like, hey, this is the bare minimum. So when you talk about, if we go to filtering, you can even take out single A. So what I would do, if you're thinking about how am I going to approach accessibility, start with single A, and that's your baby step, right? So the first project we're going to do is we're going to get ourselves up to single A. Okay, now we're up to single A. Now let's go up to double A, and there's going to be additional criteria, different things you don't need to do in order to get yourself up to that double A. Triple A, again, don't even worry about. I think they said that their own site isn't even triple A. I mean, it's very difficult to ever achieve that. So you want to start with single A. And that's the stuff like alt tags, right? So it's not something like, let's wait on alt tags, let's do something else. Like alt tags is single A, and that is the bare minimum that you should be doing to make sure that your site's accessible.
But what I'm thinking of is, okay, let's say I have a business and I build websites for folks.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have to meet the bare minimal. However, when is going to be the case where I have to build it to where it's a double A?
Mm-hmm.
Like those stuff, I get an audit and say, hey, you need to increase your standard, or how do you?
That is a possibility, yeah. And I'll talk about what's happening with Section 508 here in a minute and how it's going back to the double A. So I think that, and again, I just want to talk, I joke I'm not a lawyer, but it's thinking, be careful. I mean, I think that if you're meeting single A, you're better than probably 50% of the other site, or 90% of the other sites on the web, right? So I mean, I'll show you some examples of just how folks just aren't accessible. So if you meet that single A, that's a great first step. I think that, I don't want to say that you can't strive for, that you shouldn't strive for double A. I mean, that's really where you need to be really, when we talk about the technical, just checking the boxes, you can just check the boxes on single A and probably be okay, right? But if we want to make sure things are actually usable, and that I do have someone with a credit card in their hand, I want them to purchase, there are things that you could be double A on the check marks. Technically, everything sounds like it's accessible, but there are things that these tools won't catch that unless you actually test, that they can't give you your money because that there's issues. So these are sort of the check boxes you have to make, but it doesn't stop you, or it's not a substitute for actually doing real testing and making sure that people can use it. So we'll go through Section 508. So Section 508 is, it's put out that federal agencies have to be accessible. So this is legally enforceable. And so if your company sells or does business with the government, you have to make sure that you're Section 508, right? So compliant. And it has been stale for the last 17 years, as I say here, but it did just get updated like literally in the last couple of weeks. So the new legislations, if you click on this link, it's not pretty. It's like a nasty government document that's pretty much understandable. And understandable. So effective date, so it is coming, right? So this is coming in March, and the compliance dates are coming in, a year basically, right? And so, as I said back here, that WCAG 2.0 AA is the new standard for Section 508. So those were, previously there were two completely different standards that had different criteria for meeting accessibility requirements. Now they're merging them, not so much merging them like actually, but they're taking all the requirements for WCAG, and Section 508 said, okay, our stuff's so out of date, it's 20 years old, we actually need to adopt new standards. And so that's what they did, is that rather than creating yet another standard, that they went ahead and just adopted WCAG. And again, that's from the legit, that's coming from W3C, so it made sense. So I'll list out some resources here. Again, tons of ways that you can consider. So this is like Section 508 checklist. This is probably going to go away very soon, right? Because we're moving to the WCAG. So now you can just go to WCAG to make sure that you're Section 508. So, schools, if you're doing financial stuff with government, I mean, anything that you're getting money from the government, you're going to have to make sure that you're Section 508. So as I sort of said, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to say that, if you think that this is something that you're worried about, hopefully your company has a legal department or has outside counsel that you can start consulting with, because it is something that, making sure that you are compliant, you want to spend, making sure that you put forth the right, put the right resources against it if you think it's something you're worried about. Okay, so anything else? Sorry, I'll make sure we're leaving enough time to kind of dig in a little bit. So testing tools, so I want to spend some time looking at these testing tools. So that's what I talked about, is that testing is one of the most important pieces of accessibility, because you don't know if your site, just because you think you develop right doesn't mean that it is unless we test, right? We test all of our sites. So there's different ways that you can test, and so the first line of defense is what I call it, is sort of programmatic. So lots of different options here, and I'll go back here in a minute and kind of dig into a few of these, but a bookmarklet, that's the one that's just JavaScript that runs, that will scan your site and give you feedback on your, so it's not even a plugin, it's just a bookmarklet. You just drag it to your bookmark bar, and any page that you're in, you click it and you get a report. I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. There are some plugins. This isn't exhaustive, but these are the two that are probably among the better ones. Is AXEX, that's put out by DQ, and then Wave, I believe, is put out by WebAIM. WebAIM, yeah. So, and then online tools. So suppose you don't want, you don't want to do browser plugins. There are tools that you can just put your URL into, a text field and hit, scan, and they'll do all that work for you. So this same tool is not only available as a browser plugin, but also you can just put in your URL. Tendon.io is relatively new. That's Carl Groves, who's really well known in the accessibility world. He created this, and the cool thing about Tendon.io is it's very robust. They do have the text field, scan your site, but then they built an enterprise solution. They built a whole API around it. I think you can start integrating that into your test suite. So depending on how sophisticated your QA department is and what they're doing for QA, that there are tools that you can start baking in. I think there are even Grunt and Gulp plugins that you can do that you can fail a build. If it, it's going to go out there, check accessibility, and you can have a failed build if it doesn't meet accessibility requirements. So there are ways of depending on how you're doing QA. And then the web contrast checker, and that's just making sure that your site meets contrast. When I run some of these tools, you'll see almost like half the errors are contrast. I mean, that's the one that is so easy to do. And CodeSniffer even gives you a recommendation on what color you should use. So I'll go back to that here in a second. I'm going to get through these different ones. So manual testing. So we check the box, right? So those tools are going to check WCAG, level 2, and they're going to give you a report. And let's say that you go through there and you meet all of them. I would say, yeah, you've checked the box, right? You meet the technical requirements, but that doesn't mean it's actually usable, right? So how are we going to test it? So depending on your OS and how, what your configurations are, Mac has a built-in one, it's VoiceOver. I did add Chromevox. It's not very popular and most people don't use it, but I want to make sure there is another option. But use VoiceOver. That's what, if it's someone who is sight impaired, needs a screen reader, and they're on a Mac, they're more than likely going to use VoiceOver. For PC, there's a lot more options, and what I'll show you here in a minute is most folks are not on Mac, surprisingly. JAWS is actually commercial software. It's not cheap. I think last $2,000 a license. It's pretty expensive, and it's not even. It is the most popular, but we'll talk about what's going on in this world here in a second. Zoom Text, Window Eyes, NVDA is free, and then Chromevox again. It's a Chrome plugin, and the feedback, if you look at the plugin site that has the reviews, it's not very well received. If you're on mobile, so how are we going to test on mobile devices? Again, iOS already has built-in VoiceOver. The cool thing is that when you're building in the dev tools for iOS building, they do have an accessibility inspector, so you can start getting feedback on accessibility without actually manually testing. So that piece is more on the automated side, more so than the manual. But I didn't want to include that because I did have iOS. And then Android has built-in their TalkBack. And then the easiest thing is the keyboard only, right? So everyone has a keyboard. Throw away your mouse, disconnect your mouse, put it on the side, and see if you can navigate your site. So in the screen readers, so this is a great survey that WebAIM puts out. I think it's every 18 months, and it's screen reader survey 6, so it's kind of cut off over here. But if you go to WebAIM and search for screen reader survey, so you see JAWS is number 1 at 30%, but then these two came out of nowhere. It used to be like even 18 months ago it was JAWS, and I think NVDA was up here. Zoom Text, Window Eyes came out of nowhere, and now they're taking up the bulk of the over 40%. NVDA is pretty popular, and as I said, VoiceOver is just not up there. It's at 7%, and then Chromevox, nobody's really using it. So I would really focus on the top. If you have the capital budget and you can convince people to buy JAWS, I think it is the number 1 screen reader and has been probably for over a decade now. But then these are coming up quickly, and NVDA is free. So I'll talk about simulators. So this is the actual name of the extension. I want to see like the colorblind. I think they could have come up with a better name. But that's a Chrome extension, and you can actually simulate your site using different types of colorblindness. And I don't even want to name them. There's about half a dozen different conditions that you can simulate. And then I didn't even know this until I started, within the last few weeks, that you can actually in Photoshop, and I'll show you how to do this. You can actually test a couple of these different popular types of colorblindness right inside of Photoshop. And then I wanted to include this just for folks that, if this is something that you're going to get serious about, there are a number of vendors that are pretty well known in the accessibility space. If your organization's saying, we need to really, bring in those experts, as I sort of talked about, SSB BART, DQ, Vasilio, and WebAIM. I didn't know until recently WebAIM actually does have consulting services as well. Their website's amazing. If you go there, you could spend a week just looking through all their accessibility. They do a great job. So that just kind of rounds out the vendors if that is something that that your organization might want to do. The one thing that I thought about was that when you think about accessibility, and this is something I thought about just here recently, is that HTML, right? So when you think about what is HTML, that's an acronym, right? We think about it's so common, right? But it's hypertext markup language. And so what I started thinking about is, when you think of this last word of language, and something that I think hopefully that something that I think about that my parents taught me is that your words matter, right? The way that you talk, the words that you use matter, and that that applies to HTML too, right? And it is a language, and I think that we forget that, and I think that because the web has become so interactive now, and that there's so many new tools that we can use, is that we kind of forget that HTML is a language. In the when I'm saying words, the markup that you use does matter. And so when you think about, it's really over the last couple of years, the web's become not more accessible but less. It's because we've decided to start getting cute, right? We figured out that for some reason we think that the the language of HTML doesn't matter anymore. And because we have CSS, we have JavaScript, we have all these new frameworks, right? React and Angular and all these things that you can just manipulate any DOM object that you want to do whatever that you want. But those words matter, right? So there are things that HTML is formed in a way that matter to screen readers, that matter when you talk about robust, going forward. And so what I thought we would do is we have a few different options because I didn't know what would work best. So it's kind of think this through. So accessibility find and fix. I mean, that's something that I do a lot now, is that I'll just honestly, kind of getting, keeping my skills sharp, is I'll just go out and, Google some sites and just start taking a look, right? Running some of those test tools, see what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. So I've got a couple of examples of those if we want. Classroom, I can just go through and talk about accessibility more. I've got tons of slides, we can talk about HTML and markup and things like that. What I wasn't sure on that is that, I think it would be, I would just be teaching you HTML, right? So as I talked about that, like accessibility, until I think next week I do want to focus on ARIA. That's something that does add some additional context. And when you start getting cute and you start doing things with tabs and accordions and interactivity, ARIA will help screen readers. And so that's something that I imagine most people don't know how to use or how to use properly. But just from a introduction to accessibility and getting to that single A or double A conformity, I'm just going to be teaching you HTML and how to do it right again, if that's something that you guys would like to do. Live coding. So I can sit here and show you some examples on, code up something real quick, test it and show you. That would be somewhat similar to accessibility find and fix. Or I do have a few little hands-on activities that if you guys want to fire up, your IDE and we could download some of these testing tools. So, is there one that stands out? Bad examples. Is that all right with everyone? We can maybe do a couple. So I mean, let's do one of those. We'll see how it goes, and then I can code up. I do have a couple small examples we can show if that makes sense, and then we'll talk about next week. But I do want to dig into ARIA because hopefully and this presentation I do have. I do have some of the the actual stuff to do, and I can talk about that as I'm going through. But we can do find and fix for a second, and then let's see, what did I just do? Okay, am I gonna have to, let me get out of this so that I can actually not have to look at the back. So I thought we'll look at one that isn't too bad, and ohio.gov, did anyone work on this? All right. It's really not that bad. So here's what I do, right, is, and again, it's just sort of, whenever I see, and again, I mean, it doesn't take long, you can spend about 5 or 10 minutes, and once you get used to it, you can start to see things really quickly. Some things that I notice without doing anything, right? So I've got my test, I've got HTML code sniffer here, I've got my Axe plugin here, I've got Wave, I've got that color simulator thing I'll show you here in a second. So I've got all my tools here, but before I even do anything, I typically take a look at this and I use my mouse because I want to see how did they build it, right? What's the expected interaction that they, how did they build this, right? Okay, we've got some underlines. We have mega menus here, only when I mouse, right? So I'm not clicking, I'm just mousing. These are links, even though it didn't look like links. I mean, they're all black, so that's kind of interesting that they chose to do that. When you hover, they become red and underlined. Again, these are really no indication. They're black, not underlined. They're not blue. They're not any other color, so that's an interesting choice. So as I think about, okay, so out of the box, I could find some stuff already, right? That just makes it a little bit more difficult. I can see, and as you start to do more and more of the things, and I know that based on the report I've already run on this one, that you're going to see, as I talked about at one point, that color contrast is probably going to be your number one accessibility problem. I can already tell, right? You can start to learn if you start thinking, and all it takes is you just need to think about it, right? And so if and that's not any additional time if you do it right the first time, or just hop into Photoshop or hop into HTML and fix that, right? It'll even give you a recommendation on the number that you need to get to. Okay, so now I have a sense. There's some weird stuff that I think there's some minor accessibility issues right off the bat, and I haven't even run anything yet, right? So I talk about my first line of defense. This is a bookmarklet. So you see it's gonna take this document and send it off to their servers and come back and give me a report. So it's not a plugin. It's just you go to their site, you just drag it up as a bookmark. HTML codes. It's a Squiz Labs. Let's see. I think if you go, so they have it's GitHub. It's open source. It's just JavaScript. I was hoping. I think if you go here, go to their GitHub page. Yeah, you just drag this up to your toolbar and you're done. So super easy. So if we go back to ohio.gov, this is the first thing I'll run. And so it pops up with a little thing telling you, okay, what's going on here, right? So 20 errors, 91 warnings, and 197 notices. This is actually not bad to be, I've seen in the hundreds of errors, many hundreds of warnings and things like that. So the first thing I do is I turn off warnings because the navigation of being able to navigate the errors isn't great. So the first thing I do is just turn off warnings. So let's start looking at the errors. So they give you 5 at a time, and they use this pagination at the bottom to get through. So as we talked about, so what you can do here is that, they talk about insufficient contrast, right, as we talked about. So you click on it, and it's actually going to tell you the code snippet. If you click on, this button, it's going to give you a little thing saying, hey, right here, are you looking? Are you looking? So that light blue against the white isn't accessible. And you can see, I tend to think of this as a scale. I mean, this is the relative luminosity or relative luminance of the item against this background. So this number is kind of weird. You have to be to 4.5 to be accessible, to be considered to be accessible. So this is 2.63? 6.3. So this is pretty far off from 4.5 when you think about the scale. So this is pretty bad shape, right? And they even give you your recommendation right here. You can take it or not. If you have brand color palettes, you might need to manipulate that in different ways. Again, so color contrast, it's the same thing. So here's the deal. If I fix this, I'm going to fix this error, and I'm also going to fix this error, so, right? So I'm already, I probably spent, how long would that take, right? Like 30 seconds in your IDE, change your background color, save, push it, and I've fixed 3 errors of these 20. Again, we talked about this gray. I knew that out of the box. I could barely read it, on this. And especially for projecting, you can really see how bad these things are. So again, it becomes a little deceiving because again, if I spend 30 seconds, fixing that, now I fixed another probably 7 or 8, issues. Look at that. So there's the feature one that we've seen before. So these are contrast issues as well. Contrast. Let's see, what is this? So these are interesting ones, and I don't want to say this is a false positive, but there's stuff that I know that is out of our hands, right? So they're using some sort, if you look down here, they're using some sort of, tracking pixel. A lot of these now use iframes. You may or may not be able to control that. Sometimes it's just injected through JavaScript. And so that's one piece I did want to talk a little bit about, is that it does become challenging. I know today, we don't build stuff from scratch a lot, right? You don't build tabs, you don't build accordions, you go out and do, jQuery UI, or, Angular has their built-in, or Angular UI bootstrap stuff. A lot of those aren't going to be accessible, right? And that's a real problem, and it is something that we consider it nationwide, is, unfortunately, we haven't been able to get to the point where we're saying we're not going to use a particular live. That's not our, go, no-go is based on whether accessibility or not. But this is probably something where, unless you're going to go back to, I'm guessing that this is injected through JavaScript, through their tracking script. Unless you're going to go back to LPS media and say, hey guys, you need to add your title tag to your iframe, then that you're never, you're not going to be able to fix that on your own. So that becomes, it's just the world that we're living in. And I talk about those baby steps, right? Is that something where don't fret, take care of all your accessibility, take care of all your color contrast stuff. So take care of the stuff that's in your control. Once you get that taken care of, now you start looking at like third-party plugins and stuff like that isn't accessible. What can you do? Can you do pull requests? Can you fix it for them? Do you need to fix it yourself? or you move to something else that is more accessible. And then the last one is, again, the iframe thing. So this is, yeah, co-browse live person is another, injectable JavaScript thing. So I'm at 20 errors, right? If I just do the warnings, typically, and this is, I can choose my standard. So we talk about, there's section 508, there's single A, we were talking about that. So if we go to single A and rerun it, there's only 2 errors. Because I'm guessing those are the titles. Yep, those are the titles. So that's single A. So color contrast is actually double A, but it's the easiest one to actually fix. So you think about that. If we go back to double A, and then we'll just look quickly at the warnings. So there's 91 of them. I'm not going to go through them all. But this is more about just, hey, we see that you're doing this. You might be, but they can't programmatically figure out whether it's inaccessible or not. So they're just going to tell you, hey, take a look at this. So don't ignore these. But this is something where they just can't programmatically tell you it's absolutely an error. And probably you're going to find a lot of those usability errors in here. So I'll show you that here in a minute. Okay. Yes.
I noticed that there's a couple of sites you can't really.
Oh, hold on a second. Sorry. That's fine.
There's a couple of sites you can't really run the code sniffer.
Okay.
Yeah, one site I'm looking at right now is called Free Code Camp, and I tried hitting the HTML code sniffer on it, and I just cannot get the interface.
Okay.
Is there any instances where some sites you just can't?
Everything I've tried it on, it's worked. Maybe we can take a look at it afterwards and see if it's more of. Have you tried on another site and it worked?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's certain sites that it's not. They may be blocking it somehow, and I don't know how they be, just the way that they're using, because it is using JavaScript. I think it's basically taking all the markup, sending it out to their site and pulling back those errors.
Right.
So there may be something about that. So we can take a look and see, but I haven't run, and personally I've never run into issues. And we even use it inside of Nationwide, not even accessible in it, and we haven't had any problems. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
It could be from iframe or is it authenticated?
Yeah.
If you like password protected, it can't actually go out.
Yeah, it might be something like that, yeah. Okay. So I'll quickly just I'll show you this real quick. So I think this is interesting. Again, color blindness is, there's a couple very common ones, and this is where you just don't see colors in the normal way. So this actually simulates this. So you can kind of click through, and so I'm on this first one, right? You don't really see anything. Some of these you start to see little differences. This one, you get rid of the blue, right? Now this looks green. So this is something that you can just quickly do. You can do it in Photoshop. I did mention that, so I do want to show that real quick. So if I'm in Photoshop and I go under View, Proof Setup, right down here, I literally never knew this was here. So if you have your mockup done, you can go here and you can use these 2 types, and you can see that this color kind of disappeared down here, and then you can go back and look at. I don't want to butcher their names. So you can see the little differences. So what you're looking for here is making sure that, what I've seen in the past is that someone might say, if you're building a web form and you say, errors are in red below, and you've outlined, all you've done is this outline, and you've made the label red, and you've outlined it. So let me show you that real quick, because that's something that. So I have a couple screenshots, right? So this is one where it says hey, your error is that, we've changed the label red, and we've done that. Well, and I think it's down here, like this one, right? If you're suffering from that color blindness, so the idea here, the broader rule here is to make sure that you're not using color only to convey meaning. So we've run into this around something like, let's say that you have a how are you doing grade-wise, right? You're doing a stoplight idea, red, yellow, green. If you don't have any other shape or any other context to tell people how they're doing, if you just say, 51, and that's red, well, if they have if they have something where they can't see red, then they're just going to see this gray, and 51, okay, I have no idea, right? So always adding additional context, whether it's through shape or words, is really going to help people with color blindness. So that's something to think about. Here's another one where they, you kind of have this green, and based on different types here, I mean that's completely gone away now, right? You can't even hardly tell the difference. I think one of these down here, I think it's the same way that you know, everything's gray, right? So this is something to check, and I think that so this is different than color contrast. This is different. So color contrast is making sure that you can distinguish things, and a lot of times what we see with color contrast is going to be on a background image. If you have a background image and you have text overlaying it, that's a big problem, is because you just know, what is that photograph? What if it's, you know, especially with responsive, and you know, what's going to be the relative lumosity between those two elements. So we'll go back to ohio.gov. So we've looked at, you know, we kind of looked at color blindness. We know color contrast, there's a lot of different issues. So we saw those errors, right? So we saw the code sniffer, and I didn't see any major issues, but let's go to, so ACTS is something that you use your inspector, and it adds it down here. Okay, so it's not something, you know, if you go up here, it's meaningless. It just tells you, you know, how to remove it and things like that. So if you go to ACTS and you say analyze, okay, so we're seeing a lot of these same numbers. This is 19, color contrast, I think it's the same number that we saw before, very close. Form elements must have labels is interesting. We didn't see that before. And zooming and scaling must not be disabled. Well, those sound important, right? I mean, those are something that code sniffer didn't find. So why I'm advocating for different, you know, using different automated testing is they're all different, right? They all pick up on different aspects of it. So I don't want you just to say, oh, code sniffer is the easiest, I'm going to download it, and once I do that, I'm good. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of consistency across these different ways of checking, especially programmatically. So I would recommend having a couple of these on hand to be able to run it once or twice. So this is the same thing. If I click on here, as I sort of talk about, that's WCAG, single A, and they talk about the different sections of, you know, there's section 508, and then what you can do is they're giving you your code snippet here, right? So I only see an input here, right? So what they're saying is that you know, you have to have a label, and that's where I talk about, like, we've kind of gotten cute and away from, you know, the way that you're supposed to build forms is with labels, right? You label and you add, either you wrap it around your input, or you say label 4, and then you create that connection. I'll show that real quick. Where's my form stuff? Did I get rid of it? Okay, I got rid of it. I'm sorry. So I'll show you what the problem is, and then zooming, scaling. So this is really popular, and so I talk about responsive, right? So viewport, and honestly, this is one of these lines that I typically just copy and paste across every project, right? I mean, I haven't probably handwritten that in, you know, 5 years. So, but it's important, because what's happening here, what you see is, this is the problem right here, maximum scale of 1. So what that means is that I can't pinch and zoom on a mobile device, right? So they say maximum scale is 1. I can't pinch and zoom on this. The other thing I've seen is, open up Word. The other thing I've seen is user scalable equals no. So these two things working together are atrocious for accessibility. So much so that actually when I was looking at it and I brought up ohio.gov on my phone, I was like, oh, I'm going to show everyone that I can't pinch and zoom. iOS 10 actually now ignores maximum scale and user scalable no. It ignores those two things. So you can't control it anymore on iOS. So Android, or if you have iOS 9, but it became such a big accessibility issue that iOS decided and Apple decided, well, you don't get to choose that anymore. And people were having a heart attack. I went to Stack Overflow, and they're like, how do I disable this? Like, I can't let people zoom. And it's like, guys, no. And there's so many examples on where, you know, and I've watched videos and found videos of people who aren't completely blind, but they might be like 90% blind. And the way that they pinch and zoom, and they're losing their peripheral vision, they're holding their phone within an inch of their face, and they are zoomed in at like 500% to be able to recognize words. So it's something that shouldn't affect your design, right? If you've coded it correctly, being able to pinch and zoom doesn't affect your experience, you know, as a developer, your experience. So that's something that, But so I would say don't ever do this. Just because iOS is ignoring it now, Android or older iOS devices still will obey this, and that's one of the larger accessibility issues. So I'll show a couple more. So we've run some automated testing. Let's say we fixed all that, right? We've got our color contrast. We've removed the maximum scale, and we say, okay, well, let's say that we've kind of hit all the programmatic stuff, right? So we could say we checked all our boxes and this is accessible, right? So, but what we haven't done is let's start doing some manual testing. Let's look at some keyboard stuff. So I'm gonna throw away my mouse. I don't have a trackpad. So I'm just gonna start using tab, right? So the first thing that you see, and I sort of talked about, having invisible elements that are using for keyboard only. So you see, the second I hit tab on this, skip to main content. So that wasn't visible. If I get off of it, it's not there. So if you're using a mouse, you'll never see it. Only if you're using a keyboard. You could put a tracking event against that, right? If you click that invisible item, then we'll ping it back to Google Analytics. But I'm using a keyboard, right? I'm not sight impaired. I'm not using a screen reader. I don't need to use that. So let's keep going. Let's tab. Things look good, right? I can see where I am. That's important, right? So if I go back, what did I just do? If I go backwards, I can see there's an outline at least. I can see where I am. I can see my focus. So this is a little bit interesting, right? Is that, remember when I use my mouse, I can see the mega menu? Here I can't. I can only tab through. Now the thing that they did right, at least, is I can go to Living in Ohio, and it will take me there. And if you look, all of this is exactly what is in this. So they maybe didn't do the absolute best that they could have done, but at least they did make it so that I can't get to all the information that I want to. And I think that was about it. I can see where I am. Tab order makes sense. I'm able to I can see where I am. I'm getting through. So I felt pretty good about that. So overall, but the one thing I did see is, let's say I am getting older, I'm sight impaired, and let's say I just can't see things the way I used to. I need to really zoom in. So this is cool, right? That now the way that browsers work is that it obeys your width when you zoom in. So now I'm not having to pan and zoom. So if I am older, I can get to all my content, right? But in a much larger way. So that's awesome. They've made, so we talk about progression and accessibility. That's awesome. But now let's say I've done that, but I'm not using a mouse. I'm only using a keyboard. Let's see what happens here. So I'm at ohio.gov. I hit tab. I'm down here. Well, there's that menu button up there. I can't get to it. Why can't I get to that menu button, right? What's going on? So that's where, okay, what's going on? So I've tested. I haven't actually dug into anything yet. I haven't even viewed source. But what's the problem? So if I inspect, what's the problem? Yes. Can I just do it this? So does anyone see the problem? It's a div. So when I talk about your language matters, right? What is a div in HTML? It's a divider. It's a section, right? It's not a button. It's not a link. They get cute, and they add this ID on it, and so they've tried. They've wrapped it in a nav. Here's the logo, but here's this div ID. There's nothing focusable there. I can't get to it. Yeah, so here's your options, right? So I think the best way is to make it a link or a button, and that's really what is the robustness, right? So that you're using semantic markup. When something's a button, it should be a button. It's not a div with JavaScript that makes it act like a button. What we can do, tab index. So tab index is a little finicky, and I don't really like using it because, and I did this like years ago, is that, I'm going to add tab index to every single element on the page. It's ridiculous. Don't ever do that, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You'll lose your mind because you add a new navigation link, and it's out of whack. Build your markup. Again, language matters. Build your page the way that you want people to traverse it. So I'm cheating the system a little bit here. I'm adding a tab index of 0. What that does is it doesn't mess up the whole tabbing order, but it makes this focusable. So if this actually obeys what I've just done, boom. Now I'm here. But look, see, it's not any better yet. So okay, so I made it focusable, but what are they doing? So what they've, and I won't dig into this aspect of it, but they've made it where it's mouse click down is the only way that I can activate this. So I'm hitting this, I'm hitting spacebar, all I'm doing is scrolling down the page with spacebar. So within like what, 5 seconds, I was able to get this in the tab order, but they didn't build it right, where now they assume that you have to use a mouse in order to the mouse on, mouse down event. So what they would need to do, what I would need to do next then is go into the JavaScript, find out where that's executing, and make it a little bit more robust. So that's where, okay, this error wasn't found, right? So they said, hey, you passed, you're completely accessible, but oh, by the way, right now, no one can get to your menu, if you're at this size because you've completely made it inaccessible. So that's the difference between those technical. I've checked all the boxes. I think that I'm WCAG, but that's why they make it they're not trying to be vague, but they're trying to make you think about these rules and say keyboard only. And then, so if you don't check keyboard only, programmatic tools couldn't find that, unfortunately. Maybe we'll get there in the next few years. They'll say, hey, you're using a div and I found your JavaScript and that's a mess. You shouldn't be doing that. We're not there yet. So you're going to have to do some manual testing to make sure that your sites are accessible. So we've kind of beat up on them enough. So that's where, first of all, I just look at a site. Let's see how it's supposed to act. And you should know that as you're developing. But you think about how, if all you do is then you start layering on, the easy stuff, right? The tabbing, the color contrast, you kind of have to think about, like, did I get cute on this project? I keep talking about that, but I think about, language matters. Did I think that, oh, I don't need, I can completely add all this navigation through CSS or something like that, right? That's not using markup the way it's supposed to, and screen readers just aren't there yet. Screen readers are not as dumb as I thought that they might have been, and maybe things are evolving, right? So CSS does play a role in screen readers, and I can probably show that here in just a second. Inspect. Where's the search? Search form. Okay. So we've got this input. Autocomplete off, we've got some classes, we've got the ID. Here's the label, right? So the label is for query. So they've built this relationship. They say for query, and they've done it right where, let me zoom in, sorry. Get rid of this. Yeah, so you see display none over here. ARIA has pop-up. So they're trying, right? They're close. Where's ID? ID of query. So, and this is where things get a little bit interesting, and this is where even like myself, it's, when you start using a screen reader, it's kind of uncharted territory, right? So it's something that you don't use every day, right? That it does take some time to actually read up on documentation. There is a voiceover, DQ, as I talked about, they're one of the vendors I talked about. They've added some ways that you can navigate right through, and so it's very unintuitive if you don't use a screen reader every day. How are you going to actually use a screen reader? So you need to be a little bit careful, and this is what I talk about, like more advanced, is because you can easily get false positives where, oh, I'm not able to get to this. It might be actually your issue that you don't understand that technology enough, so you need to be careful with it. So, and even I'm still like a novice, right? Because I don't use it every day. But let's just show you really quickly. So on a Mac, it's Command F5.
VoiceOver on Chrome, Ohio.gov window, Ohio.gov HTML content has keyboard focus.
So this is VoiceOver.
You are currently on HTML content.
And remember,
to enter the web area, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow.
This is a system, right? So this isn't a browser. So I can use this in Word and Excel and everything. It's not a browser. It is a system technology that's reading the browser, reading what's in the HTML. So if I
Visit
start
internal
tabbing,
link. Skip to main content. You
The
are
other
currently
thing-
on a link inside of HTML content. To click this link, press Application, Accessibility Options window. Accept Chrome, Ohio.gov, voiceover off.
Okay, so really quickly. So it can become annoying, right, as you always have it on. But the other thing is that the speed is turned way down to actually we can all understand it. I found some videos of people who are sight impaired who use a screen reader every single day. They have their settings turned so high up that you literally cannot understand. And that's what you hear about once you lose your sight, that other senses take over, right? So they don't, so the things to remember about someone who's using a screen reader, first of all, they're not that different from us from how they want to navigate the web, right? So are you going to carefully evaluate every single link on here and, oh boy, what do I want to do? No, I mean, they want to be able to jump around and they want to complete their tasks as quickly as possible, just like we do, right? So I'll walk through this just a little bit.
Voiceover on
and
Chrome. Link. Visited. Search Ohio.gov.
Okay.
You are currently on a text
So
field.
search Ohio.gov,
To enter text in this
right?
field, type.
So that sounded good. Now, this is where it gets a little weird, right? So I'm
Visited.
gonna go
Link.
back.
Image. Edit text. Blank. You
So
are
now
currently on a text
I
field.
went back.
To enter text in this
Did
field,
you hear
type.
blank? So the first time it understood it. It said search ohio.gov and it understood what to read. It even though that label was display none. Now when I come back the second time,
Visited. Edit text. Blank.
edit text
You
blank.
are currently
It
on a
doesn't
text field.
understand it,
To
right?
enter text
so
in
that's
this
where
field,
things
type.
get a little bit interesting. So I would say that what you would need to do, and so that's where that relationship between screen readers and CSS is if you say display none in CSS, it will more than likely obey that. So that it's not going to read it because you said display none. So we are getting more sophisticated in screen readers, and it is understanding some relationship between your CSS and your markup. So what we will do is typically
New tab. Select.
Oh boy.
Voiceover off.
Okay, CR. I think Bootstrap. I mean only Bootstrap. So if we look at this markup, if I can quickly find it. Basically what you're doing is the technique that you typically want to do is you want something to be read, but not seen. Instead of doing display none, and this is Bootstrap, you can do this yourself. I mean, there's nothing special about this, but they name it CR only, screen reader only. And what you're doing basically is you're getting it off the page. And I've seen other techniques. This is using clip to 0, border 0. So it's really just completely wiping this out. It's not visible, but it's on the page. The other technique I've seen, it's like, position absolute, and you can just throw a left of -99999, EMs, and it just throws it out into the ether, right? But screen readers will still read that. If you do display none, you can't guarantee that it will. So that's something that's, when you start playing with screen readers, you start to realize there is some true relationship between the markup and the screen reader.
Voiceover on Chrome. Search
Second.
button.
Search
You are
button.
visited. Link. RSS icon. Instagram icon. YouTube icon. Twitter icon. Facebook icon.
Those are your
You are
alt
currently on a
tags.
visited link. Living in Ohio.
Visited
List
link.
7 items. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press link. Visited
Done.
link. Visited link. Government link. For work, list 8 link.
So
For
it's
tax
reading
forms
well,
and information.
right? So I mean,
You are
so this is where
currently
you
on a
start
link.
to learn.
To
It's-
click
it's
this
a little
link,
bit-
press Control,
it's
Option,
a little bit
space.
different than
Voiceover off.
what you would use to, and you're like, oh, I wanted to say something link, right? That's not really the way that it works, right? And the people who use screen readers, again, they're going 100 miles an hour. The last thing I'll show you.
Voiceover on Chrome. Ohio.gov window. Link. For tax forms and information has keyboard focus. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control,
So
Option, space.
There's this rotor. VO is the command. So VO, so if you start learning this, it's Control and Option on a Mac, and then U. So what I want to do here real
Link.
quick is just
Landmarks menu.
bring this up. So what I'm doing is when I talk about people with screen readers, they don't want to read your site any more than sighted people do, right? They don't want to read every single link. So this is called a rotor, and I don't know if JAWS does have the same thing, right? They have these ways of navigating differently, right? So you're not just screen reading the entire thing. So here's landmarks. So we can talk about ARIA. We'll talk about that next week. So here's your landmarks.
Banner. Navigation. Main.
So it's getting you around the page
Window
where
spots
you want
menu.
to. Here's Windows spots.
Links menu.
Here's links, right? So I can quickly get through. I don't have to
To find
navigate
online
everything.
headings menu.
Here's your headings. So again, your markup starts to matter, that your H1s and 2s and, see, they don't have any H3s here, but your markup matters in the way that because it is going to impact these things.
Link window.
It's going to tell
Landmarks
you the
menu.
landmarks. I'll tell you about those ARIA.
Link heading. Form controls
headings.
menu.
Form controls. That matters, right? Because they want to, if they're filling out a form, they may not want to step through it. They want to, avoid all your navigation crap and get straight to your form. They're going to go here, right? So
Edit text. Search button. Edit text. Blank.
Edit text blank. So I'm here. I want to search your site. I'm going to assume that you have a form for your search. Now,
Search
can
button.
you figure it out? Can they figure it out? Maybe.
Edit text.
But
Blank.
it would take like 5 seconds to add CSS, and instead of say display none, throw it off the page, and it'll work fine.
No items in form controls menu.
Oops.
No items in form controls menu.
What are you doing?
Link.
There we go.
For voiceover off.
There we go. And I'll show you Dublin real quick. So this is one that isn't quite as good. And what I'm doing now is I'm tabbing. If you look down here, econ development, there's no visual representation, right? So there's absolutely, I'm just tabbing through. I have no idea where I am, still have no clue. Oh, okay, now I'm here finally, right? I have some clue. I see black. So they actually open their menu. Say ohio.gov, they didn't open their menu when I was tabbing through. They did, okay, So they've got some issues with some focus, and I'll show you why that's not working. We're going through, but watch what happens here. Okay, so I'm on services, and I hit tab. Okay, here I am. So City of Dublin, key. So I'm down here, I think. Nominate, Grand Leprechaun. So I'm down here. I don't see any visual representation of that, but I'm down here all of a sudden. Well, what about, I want to go learn about your safety or your events, what's going on, right? I wasn't able to get there. Well, what's the expected? Oh, I see, that's interesting. But what's the difference? And if you notice it's subtle, what cursor do I have here? I've got the hand, right? If I mark over here, oh, that's weird. Why do I have the text input, right? And the text and the text. So again, that's something that's a red flag. I'm saying, what's going on? I'm going to inspect and say, what are you guys doing? How are you being cute? And it's like, oh, well, that's an A tag. That's right? But what happened here is, let's look at this one. This is an A tag. It has an href. And that's the difference, right? So again, markup matters. What you're doing matters. Because here, they apparently didn't have a link for Parks and Rec. There's no href. So the tab, it doesn't focus anymore. I don't get the finger because it doesn't think it's a link. This is what you use as a, back to top, anchor naming thing, right? So that's why it's not focusable. That's why, so they need to clean that up, right? So if I'm not using a mouse, or if I'm not using a screen, if I'm not using a mouse, I'm completely missing half your site. Half your site's completely gone if I'm not using a mouse.
So what you're trying to say is, if the anchor tag doesn't have an href attribute, then the screen reader is just going to completely...
Keyboard, screen reader, it's just going to pass it by as if it was an A name top, and then you have a href back to top. So it just becomes an anchor, not an actual.
So what would be the solution? Put an empty href?
I'd probably put a pound, and then you got to do the, what is it? Ignore or prevent default, so that you don't actually anchor anywhere. So again, how long would that take, right? You add a pound, you add like literally one line of JavaScript. You're already using JavaScript to make this stuff appear. All you need to do is just say, on click, prevent default, so it doesn't actually go to the pound.
Would it be safe just to put I see what you mean. So put an on click on the actual, like inject JavaScript into it, on click, and then...
Well, you would just say, because if I left it as a pound, when I click on it, I would go to USA. So let's say I'm all the way down here, and then it would go to that. I would go back to the top of the page. You don't want it to do that. So in JavaScript, you can just say, just ignore the pound. So I did talk about. So we talked about viewport stuff. What else did I want to show? Oh, the focusable. So this is where, if you're already using hover, which is most people, that's what we saw, right? Is a lot of. So let's go back to Dublin here real quick. When I'm even with my mouse, I don't even give a. So they're not even using hover state. So that's not even going to help us, right? But if you are already using If you're already using hover, all you have to do is you just add a focus. So focus is keyboard, and then hover is your mouse, right? So those two things again. And then you just do whatever you wanted to do for your hover, you also want to do for your focus. And so again, like 3 lines of CSS and you're done. And I was asking someone if there's even like, there might be a gulp plugin or some SaaS stuff that you can mix in that you can just automatically do that, so that anytime you have a hover, it just adds the focus automatically if you don't want to do it programmatically. We talk about like semantic stuff. So this is what, this is a screenshot from JAWS. And so, we talk about like, don't use click here for your links, again, because someone doesn't want to read your whole site. They don't understand the context. So even if you say to learn more about, our company, click here. Well, they're not going to read your entire site, right? They want to just go to links. So if you don't have any context, all that this person's going to see is click here with absolutely no context. So what we've done is, you can actually do something like this, and this semantic is the same technique as the screen reader only. It just takes it off the page so you don't see it. But if you absolutely have to only say learn more, right? Then what you can do is you can give it some more context about flexible solutions, and you can take it off the page. You're probably going to, don't quote me, but you'll probably see some SEO uplift if you're not worried about accessibility. If accessibility isn't enough of a concern, SEO, if you can convince people, hey, we're going to get a bump in SEO, because this does, now you've got inside this link, you've got more contextual stuff that are more keyword rich, and they love that. But what this is doing though is that it's saying learn more. So you might even have up here, you might have an H1 flexible solutions, and we have awesome flexible solutions. Learn more, right? So if I only bring it, if I'm using JAWS, if I'm using the rotor, I'm only looking through your links, all I'm going to see is learn more here. I won't have that context. But adding that semantic, we will be able to see everything. So I showed you some different techniques, right? So we looked at just kind of what's the intended use, and you should know that if you're building your own site, you should know how you think it's going to act. But then, so you can see, I haven't done anything. I haven't taught you, I hope. I hope that I've taught you to think about it, but there's nothing new in accessibility that would change HTML, right? You're coding the way that you're supposed to. Links are hrefs. Buttons, you use buttons. Talked about a little bit like adding focus instead of just hover, so that someone with a keyboard. And if I just keep saying like, stop being cute. We've gotten so awesome. Like, hey, look, Mom, I can make a button out of a span tag. Well, that's not, that's cool and awesome, but your words matter. What you put in that HTML does have impact to other things. And is that what you should, you talk about robustness, that's beyond accessibility. That's just good markup that you should be using anyway. So, looked at the keyboard only. We have some automated tools. You have links to all of those. I'll make sure that you get the presentation as well. Did a little bit of some screen reading. That's a little bit, you kind of have to get used to it, right? You need to do some research, and there are tools out here. I'll make sure, this voice over DQ has a really good way. So you're not going to, out of the box, you're not going to be able to fire up a screen reader and be able to start, navigating through. And then, so keyboard only, we talked about screen readers, we gave some automated tools, right? So hopefully that gives you kind of an overview of some ways that you can start thinking about accessibility. Again, it's not new HTML that I can teach you. Because if I started teaching about accessibility in HTML, I'd just be teaching you HTML. Because I was thinking about like, okay, well, what kind of assignment am I going to give you? Like, make a button. It's like, well, hopefully, unless you're trying to be cute, you're going to add a button. It's like, hey, it's accessible. Great job, everyone. I don't understand, but it's that mindset of thinking that I'm going to be deliberate in my code. I'm not even thinking, and to the point where you don't even think about accessibility. You think about doing things right, the way that it's supposed to be. The web is built to be accessible out of the box. It's us that is making it inaccessible because of adding, on-click events, the divs that doesn't work for keyboard, doesn't work for screen readers. So for next week, we got about 3 minutes or so. Next week, I definitely want to hit on ARIA because that is something probably new. And when you start doing more robust applications, tabs, accordions, I want to make sure that you kind of understand that. Do you want me to spend about like a half hour doing ARIA and some of the more advanced accessibility techniques, and then maybe give you guys some assignments? You want to do some hands-on, then maybe test it yourself? Does that work?
Yeah, I learn a lot better
You start doing it? Absolutely, absolutely. So what I'll do is, and we'll have more time because I won't be up here and kind of giving you the background and business case and all that stuff. So why don't I spend 15 or 20 minutes just giving you, so all the techniques, and then I may give you guys some starter. I'll see, maybe give you some frameworks so that you guys aren't starting from scratch. But yeah, bring your IDE, and if you guys want to install some of the stuff, again, if you'll go back out, I can Slack or Twitter, I can send another email. Make sure that you guys, if you feel comfortable and are able, we're a little iffy on my work laptop of what we can install. But if you feel comfortable installing these different things, especially if you're on a PC, those screen readers are system software. It's not just a browser plugin. So NVDA is, you can use NVDA across your entire PC, not just web browsing. And same with Zoom and Window Eye. So those two are system software. And then we'll leave a good hour and a half or so. And maybe we'll do groups, maybe not, but then we'll do some hands-on with some more like maybe accordions, tabs, ARIA, build a quick form or something like that. So we'll give you guys some hands-on so that you can build it yourself, think about it as you're building, keeping accessibility in mind. And hopefully the test will go super smooth because you're already thinking about it, right? The problem with accessibility is, again, if you're not thinking about it and you're going to get cute, but because you're in this class, you're going to say, I'm not going to make it a div, I'm going to make it a button and do it right. So hopefully your testing goes really smooth, right? One last thing I'll talk about just really quickly is that, how it can go so smooth is that, so we're working on a new navigation for our website, and this just happened literally yesterday at like 4 p.m. So so I'm a creative technologist in the UX group, and we had another creative technologist, and he was working on this mega menu for a new header. And that gets complicated, right? There's a lot of things that can happen, and, as you can sort of see, this is, that they made the decision. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but they made a decision not to open the menus if I'm only using a keyboard. So what we had this conversation is, CT's like, hey, Bryan, let's start thinking about accessibility on this. What can we do, right? So, and I started looking at it. And I'm like, man, you know what? We're like, because he thought about it, I saw the right ARIA tags already there. It was opening up. I mean, things were a little bit funky with the keyboard, but he was probably like 80% already accessible, just making sure all the focusability was right and things like that. And we had like a 5-minute conversation, and what we said is, okay, navigation is very important. We want to give the best experience to our users on our navigation because that's where they're going to get around. What do we do? And so we had this little huddle with an interaction designer, a couple of our front-end guys, and we started thinking through, okay, well, if I tab here, what do I want to have happen? I want to open. Well, what if so like Dublin, let's see if I can go back. So I'm here. Like, what if I hit tab? Do I want to go to annual report? Or, because I didn't really want to open that yet. I don't want to have to, you're forcing me to go through all of these. I want to go from about to government. And then when I click on government, I hit enter, and now I'm going to open the menu, and then I can tab through. So then you start having really cool conversations, and literally like 15 minutes later, okay, it wasn't 15 minutes. It was a couple hours. All right, sorry. I don't want to oversell it. But a couple hours later, he had done, again, we were at like 95%, right? So it's just a couple hours of work of being deliberate, thinking about it, thinking about keyboard only. We weren't even thinking about screen readers at this point. But it didn't take much, and it's just thinking, how do we want someone, it wasn't days or weeks of us writing requirements and how are we going to do this? It's something that you can test. You have on your system right now as a keyboard, right? So everyone can go back to your sites right now, throw away your mouse and start using your keyboard only, start tabbing through and see what happens, right? So that was something that worked really well for us, and it's something that, when you start thinking about accessibility all the time, you start to have these really cool conversations. And it becomes kind of a cool coding challenge, right? How do we want to make sure that, keyboards, this is easy, right? Using a mouse, that's hopefully something we've done forever. But, really thinking through, okay, I'm tabbing, if I'm using a keyboard only, how do I want to navigate and traverse? So with that, we will wrap up. 2 hours next Saturday, 10 to 12, same location. So, and we'll do some hands-on. So bring your computers. If you're all set up, that's great, with your IDE and browsers. If you want to install some of these things, go ahead, and we'll do some hands-on. So, awesome. Thanks, everybody.